Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Sausys. Swami Vivekananda's first address to the Parliament of World Religions in the late 1800s had a deep spiritual tone and is considered one of the most important dates for the history of yoga in USA. Far from that tone, the popularization of yoga in modern times involved a deep emphasis in the practice of asana, the physical component of yoga, and today, more teachers are slowly going back to including the mental and spiritual aspects of the practice, the true essence of yoga. My guest today has the best of both worlds. He is popularly known in the States and abroad, has a deep understanding of asana, and yet is rooted in the ancient knowledge and traditions of yoga. He is Rod Stryker. Welcome, Rod.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rod Stryker is the founder of ParaYoga and the author of The 4 Desires, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity, and Freedom, and also blogs for the Huffington Post. He has taught for more than 30 years, training teachers and leading corporate seminars, yoga retreats, and workshops throughout the world. He met yoga master Kavi Yogiraj Mani Finger and his son Yogiraj Alan Finger, whom he studied for 20 years, and is a current disciple of Pandit Rajmani, spiritual head of the Himalayan Institute. Rod.
Antonio.
The one question that everyone wants to know. How did your personal yoga path start? What was your first experience with yoga?
Well, it's a little bit of a strange story. My first experience with yoga, I was 5 years old, and I was at my granduncle's house. It was the summer I learned to ride a bike. For one reason or another, I was led to a bookshelf, and I pulled at the age of 5 a book off the shelf, opened it, and I saw pictures of a man doing asana, a man doing yoga, and page after page of doing really extraordinary things with his body. I have still this vague image of it. And I remember making a kind of vow consciously that one day I would do that. And I think implicit in that moment was the sense that this man was doing more than just moving his body. He was somehow coming into a certain level of self-mastery. And it's odd, but at 5 years old, that's what struck me, and that was my very first experience. It would be about 12 or 13 years later when I actually started it in a formal way and in a real way. But that was the beginning.
And how was your, let's say, second beginning, or the second opportunity, 12, 13 years?
I was having a conversation with someone one day, and they said, you should try yoga. I had just left college in my junior year and was working hard. And I don't know what about me at the time. She said, you should try yoga, but she encouraged me to try it. I was too busy, working too much to actually get to a class. And I wound up picking up a copy of Light on Yoga, which in many ways is the Bible of asana, Mr. Iyengar's book, and did it out of my apartment on my own for about 9 months. And even in those early days, without any formal instruction, just working out of the book, I had some extraordinary experiences that just began to develop my curiosity about yoga more and more. And I remember when I was first reading about it, he has about a 50-page introduction that really covers the philosophical, the spiritual background for yoga. And I remember reading it and really feeling as though I was remembering something. I wasn't learning something, which is, I think, the way most people, when they encounter yoga, they have a similar experience.
Well, in yoga we say that the knowledge is already within us. So it is a common experience, you're right. Now it's interesting that from the get-go, even though you started with Iyengar, who has a lot of emphasis in asana, and he's very dedicated to the practice of asana, you already went to the philosophical and spiritual part.
I guess it is true, and in a sense, looking back, they were never separate for me. And as I said, I had some initially very powerful experiences with it. There and lying in my apartment, single, living on very modest means. I was 18 years old in Denver, Colorado. And yet I remember really being touched in a profound way. In a way, I was touching something I was using my body, but I felt that I was touching something far beyond my body. And that although I had been athletic for many years of my life, that clearly yoga had the ability to touch upon something that was not, that physical exercise simply can't and could not.
And today, looking back and after having a career in teaching and in writing and knowing probably so much more about yoga, what would you say yoga has given you personally?
A life, you know, a life. I mentioned, you know, it's really been a tangible and real part of my life since the age of 18. I can, you know, when I was in college, I studied philosophy. I was both a philosophy and psychology major. And whatever that seeking was of trying to understand both myself and how to interact with other human beings and how to interact with the world, yoga showed it to me, frankly. Yoga, really from the very beginning, began to give me a glimpse that it was possible to be more whole. You know, to kind of cure that hunger or to speak to that thirst for being as full as we can possibly be as human beings. And that's innate, that we all want that. We all want to maximize our potential. We all want to feel that all of us is in the moment, that we are present, you know, and that the best of us is coming forward at any given time. That's what yoga has given me. And there certainly, it wasn't an instantaneous process, and it's been a gradual, pedal by pedal, gradual self-discovery, and still a very human process, but yoga has given me my life, and for one of which I'm immensely grateful and profoundly appreciative of.
And how would you personally define yoga?
This is the great question, Antonio. And it really, you know, I mean, well, look, if we wanted to get very traditional about it, we'd say that yoga is the stilling of the thought waves of the mind. Yoga is a process of stilling the mind, period, end of sentence. And this is what the great sages have said, that yoga is a mind thing. It's about overcoming the mind and allowing the mind to become our ally in life. And in fact, if we really think about it, really success, and I mean this in the larger sense, not financial success, but success is impossible without tranquility. Without a calm, disciplined mind, there really is no success. Even if you have millions in the bank, if you're not peaceful, you don't really have you're not really rich. And so yoga, the sages saw that. I would say that yoga is about the mind. And you know, your introduction was a really beautiful and elegant introduction. I really appreciated the things you said about it. And you made these distinctions that are so vital. And I think that as a community, and now I'm talking about as collectively in the United States, we are starting to ask ourselves these questions about the distinction between asana, the physical practice, and the yoga. The yoga. So again, kind of, I'm taking a while to answer your question, but it's primarily about the mind. That's what yoga is about. And maybe it's helpful for your watchers, people tuning into the program today, just to make a simple distinction, and so that people understand what we're talking about, because I can see you nodding and agreeing with me, is that really yoga is two things. It's a means, something that we do, and it's a state. It's something that we experience. The means are, for example, the asanas, but that's really the tip of the yoga iceberg. You know, there's methodologies around breathing, and very precise methodologies. And again, for the benefit of your people watching and tuning in, if I want to affect my mind, my breath is a much more powerful tool than my body is. Much more immediate, too.
Immediate, yeah.
I mean, you change your breath, and within just a few moments, you're going to start shifting your mental states. It takes a while with the body. Second of all, so we work with the breath and meditation and focus, work with intentionality, work with Bob, with developing feelings. And the yogis really looked at all the human potential as a whole, the great scope of it, and began to develop modalities to heighten and develop that potential. The second piece, though, is what we're talking about tonight by making these distinctions, is that yoga is indeed a state. It's a quality of being. But I want to go one step further and simply say that yoga is this quality of being, the state of consciousness, if you will, is not just feeling better. That's why a lot of us get a little confused and say, well, look, I feel better when I do yoga, but I never meditate and I never think about my mind. Why should I get this other piece? I want to make the case for those who've tasted the experience of the state of yoga. It's beyond feeling better. The fact is most of us are in pain or stressed out or fatigued or incredibly suffering at one level or another. It's not a temporary alleviation of that. It's a much more profound experience. And so the state of yoga, as it were. So yoga is that state in which we experience our most exalted condition, our highest potential, the light of the soul itself. It's that search, and really that is the search for religion itself. Religio meaning to return to oneself. That's returning to the self, to the essence of who we are, is yoga. And that's not to be confused with the methods of yoga, which you can do and never experience the state.
Exactly.
So in conclusion, and I've taken a long time to answer what is such a simple question, what is yoga?
It's not such a simple question.
You can do stuff like asana and never experience yoga. You can experience yoga and never do asana. The real trick is, and I think the focus ultimately is, yes, it's important to be in good shape. Yes, it's important and attractive to have great muscles and being, fit. But the real hunger is to know ourselves and to experience that essence that is unlike any other experience that life can offer. And it's uncovering that mystery. It's bringing that out into the open. That's yoga.
Now, when
this is a great conversation, by the way.
Okay, yes.
We knew we were going to have a good conversation.
Now, what about the shadow? Because there is a lot written in the books about the beautiful state of yoga as enlightenment and beauty, and everything is beautiful. And the truth is that most of us, all of us, have a shadow, have a shadowy part, a shady aspect of ourselves, where there's the unconscious for psychology, where's evil for some other disciplines. Is that too part of yoga? When we get to know ourselves, when we get to that state, is that state part of it or not, or how does it play?
You mentioned a little bit about my background, and my current teacher, Pandit Rajmani Tigunait, is a real master, and yet a completely amazing, humorous, joyful, full human being. About 15 years ago, I knew it was time for another teacher. My other teacher was reaching the end of his life. He passed away at 97. And the first time I met him, he said this. He said, "You will learn much more and advance much further." I've memorized it. "You will learn much more and advance much further in life by understanding and looking into the darkness than you will by connecting to the light."
Correct.
And so I would answer in a very strong affirmative that, in fact, it's both. It is both. And to be clear, it is disconnecting from the darkness. But in order to disconnect, we have to first see it, right? And acknowledge it. And in fact, there are formal teachings about that. And the actual process in Sanskrit is called vichara. Chara means knowledge that frees us, knowledge that liberates us. And vi means to separate. So in this sense, we're actually looking for where we're disjointed. His teacher, my teacher's teacher, said, the object of yoga is not to renounce the world. The object of yoga is to renounce the unwanted parts of yourself. Vivekananda said the same thing. We make the mind still in order to view its contents. So yes, indeed, there is both this idea of communing with the light, which gets all the press,
Yes.
and and creates a lot of seeking on the part, and even kind of this kind of very almost airy idea around what yoga is. It's all about this mystical, light-filled world. And then the other piece of it is, just so we have a holistic sense of it, is really understanding the parts of us that are not helpful and non-constructive, and engaging in a process to undo it. Yeah.
I know you're fond of Tantra yoga, and I know as well that the West knows a lot more about styles of yoga, and power yoga, and other types, and flow yoga, and yin yoga, but not everybody knows about the big schools of yoga, or the big branches of yoga, and Tantra is part of it.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about Tantra yoga.
Wow, okay.
A little.
I mean, the first thing I think, there has been a lot of misinformation and a lot of mythologizing around it. So let's clear it up. Tantra does not equal sex plus yoga. Just right off the top, let's just do that piece. And so Tantra is, we can make the case that really Tantra is the source of the asanas. That yoga is this major branch, it's this incredible field of human exploration into the mind, into psychology, into the soul, into the energy systems. But where we find all of those modalities woven together into a singular system is Tantra. Tantra yoga is, a lot of people do have this orientation in the West that it's related to sexuality or something like that. But in India, Tantra is related to, assumed to be black magic. In the same way that we have a certain level of misinformation in this country, and certain teachers have kind of taken a small part of it, the sexuality, and started calling it Tantra, really, there are very few authentic sources for Tantra in the United States. And I actually make the case that the word Tantra these days means I made it up. You grab some sexual practices and some massage oil and a good glass of wine, put on Barry White, and whatever, and you now have a tantric yoga class, and you're a tantric master. The truth is that the scope of Tantra is almost unfathomable. It covers the scope of life, from everything from architecture and the quality of the directions to how you create abundance in both spiritual and material abundance. The essence of Tantra is really captured in the definition of the word. It means to weave. The idea then is how we weave spiritual experience into the fabric of life. One of the things that we quickly see, that if we start exploring yoga philosophy, is that it asks us to renounce a lot of things about life: our sexuality, our emotions, kind of enjoying our senses as a rule. Tantra says, wait a minute. Tantra says that the divine actually is everywhere, that you, in essence, are sacred already. The goal of life should be to find the sacred in every moment, not to deny part of life and look at the other part of life and say, that's the part. But rather find it in work, find it in love, find it in our gardening, find it in the flow of every day in all our relationships. And then Tantra says something quite unique, which it says that in order to succeed in that goal, fulfill that goal, you'll need power. You'll need power. For example, you mentioned earlier in that earlier question you asked me related to our negative tendencies. Our negative tendencies have power. I think most people would notice that. Our habits have power.
Huge.
And they sometimes hold sway over us, so that even if we want to change our life, our habits are so powerful, so entrenched that we can't. At the same time, I would say that in order to overcome those habits, you need power to overcome them. You need to be more powerful than your habits. We look at the world itself. We want to be more materially successful. We need power. In fact, people who are powerful, you cannot not be powerful if you want to succeed in this world. And then finally they say that there's actually kind of power to our spiritual entrenchment. That we're kind of, the fact that we are stuck. On the one hand, you hear scriptures that say our nature is enlightenment. But how many people are enlightened? The fact is that the power, that the obstacles that are keeping you from seeing that light, as it were, that recognizing that freedom, have power, and you need to cultivate a power beyond it. And the word for power in Sanskrit is Shakti. And what Tantra can almost be described as is Shakti Sadhana, the practice that builds power and capacity. And that's one of the reasons they use the asanas. But keep that in mind that not only did they use the asanas, that's really the first chapter of an 11-chapter book. They use asana, they use the breath, they use visualization, meditation, mantra, work with the chakras, work with our dualistic nature, even looking into our darkness. They use methodologies to overcome them. And clearly all spiritual paths do some version of this. But in Tantra, it's extremely systematic and scientific and methodical. And it's really unique in that sense as a spiritual system. It doesn't require fundamental belief. It requires you do methods that instantaneously move you to a better place, as yoga class does for most people.
Yeah.
But that's the first step of an 11-step process.
Now, Rod, why had United States fallen in love with asana? Why, and not just United States, it's something also about the West, a little bit in general. I'm sure that perhaps you would agree that in Europe and in South America, the spiritual aspects are a lot more developed and studied and practiced. What happened here? Why United States love asana?
Well, you know, you and I are not, if we're not in the same school, we're in the same vein and spirit in terms of our yoga and our perception of yoga in a larger context. But, you know, it'd be wrong to say that asana doesn't work. The fact is, you feel better after a yoga class. It takes not a really huge commitment to feel better as a result of doing yoga. If you're in front of a qualified teacher, someone who can put together a reasonably safe and effective routine, you feel better. You feel better when you leave than you did before you came in. I think you know, it's a combination of things, Antonio. I think the first is that it works. The second is that to a large extent, people don't understand the reach that yoga can have. How much it can create a wholesale effect and change in your life. So as a result, because it works, people have been more or less content to get to that first stage of feeling better, not fully aware of what comes afterwards. Also, we can also say that many of the initial teachers that came with very strong, what could be interpreted as a Hindu kind of bent to it and shape. It's another thing I love about Tantra, which is it doesn't require you to believe in anything, nor even assume a Hindu reality. But rather it says, do these methodologies, hold your breath, put your focus here, and begin to create these energetic shifts, and your experiences will change. So I think it's a combination of those three factors. And but you know, my own perception, and again, this was in your opening piece, you made the case that people are starting to lean toward the spiritual.
More and more.
I think it has to do with the quality of our lives. I think that we need bigger answers. We need bigger medicine for the challenges that we face, individually and collectively. And so, you know, asana does work, but it's limited about how far it can take you. As a result, people are naturally starting to gravitate to those teachers who can begin to bring, shed light on these other modalities that have deeper and more lasting effects. And so that's the good news, you know. The pyramid, it's kind of like the pyramid image where so many people are practicing asana, but now more and more people are starting to matriculate to what lies beyond asana. And I think the more, I not even think, I have great sense of certainty that as more people begin to turn to the deeper understanding and deeper practices, that it'll have a positive effect on us as a culture. And for that, you know, I'm looking forward to those changes, and it's wonderful to see that growth.
And you're helping it happen because you, as a well-known teacher, are influential in introducing these aspects of spirituality. Now, when we say spirit, you know, a lot of people feel uncomfortable and revolving their seats because, you know, there are different things. Either they don't know what spirit is or they associate it with religion. And then we find a lot of people, precisely because of yoga having been embraced by Hinduism, just making it all about Hinduism and not taking it out of the context of that religion. How do you personally deal with some of these things? You know, because I'm sure that you have to find some teachers. I mean, I remember when I first started teaching here, someone would yell from the back, "We are here for asana," you know.
Right.
Of course, we are in different times, but
Right.
I'm sure you get other grades of that reaction.
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
You know, I think you have to define the territory a little bit. You know, I mean, let me first qualify and say that I stopped teaching group classes, you know, drop-in group classes probably 10 or 12, 14 years ago. I figured, you know, I have a lot of younger students who can teach, I mean, people that I've taught who can teach them, and I've put my focus into a different kind of orientation. But when I teach at conferences, which is much more open, or when I teach in communities occasionally where I'll do a workshop over a weekend and stuff. And, you know, 10 years ago when I went into the South, I taught in Arkansas and Texas and Alabama and, you know, even parts of the Midwest, which, you know, could be considered the Bible Belt. I was very mindful of the fact of having to describe spirit in a very non-denominational sense, which is, and that truly is what it is. You know, if you look at, specifically at the yoga tradition, they don't tell you who God is, by the way, you know. They use a word like Ishwara, which just means that which presides. Mm-hmm. They don't say Jesus, Muhammad. They don't say it. They don't. So in a way, we fill in, it's meant to be filled in the blank. You know, you fill it in. Mm-hmm. Some years ago, I'll tell you a quick story. Some years ago, a student of mine came to me and showed with a newspaper clipping and said, and I hope your audience is paying attention to the whole story, because initially it may sound a little strange. And she looked very disturbed, and she said, "Oh my God, look at this. It says Christians, yoga for Christians."
Mm-hmm. Christian yoga.
Yeah, yoga for Christians. And she said, "Can you believe this?" And I said, "What's the problem?" And she said, "Well, they're taking it and making it Christian." And I said, "That's fabulous."
Christ was a great yogi.
I mean, he was a yogi. Once again, you don't have to do asana. But moreover, I said, look, and this is especially in the early days of this shift, and, you know, is this the devil's work? And is this, and I'm not speaking specifically to this idea, but let's, you know, keep it this way. What I've said to people, because I've also had Orthodox Jews talk to me about this, where, you know, there's only one God in Judaism, and if you know, don't worship under others, you know. Mm-hmm. So I said, look, here's the point. Yoga is a methodology to create clarity in the mind, to create such refinement in your perception that every moment is heightened. If as a result of doing yoga with me, you walk into your church or your temple or your synagogue and you don't feel more spiritual, more touched by that presence, then stop doing yoga with me. Because yoga should be making us more sensitive to what is real, what is present, what is sacred. And it doesn't have to have a Hindu identity at all.
This concludes the first part of a two-part show where I'm interviewing Rod Stryker. Rod Stryker is the founder of ParaYoga and the author of The 4 Desires, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity, and Freedom, and also a blogger for the Huffington Post. He has taught for more than 30 years, training teachers and leading workshops throughout the world. He met yoga master Kavi Yogiraj Mani Finger and his son Yogiraj Alan Finger, whom he studied for 20 years and is currently a disciple of Pandit Rajmani, as spiritual head of the Himalayan Institute. I hope you liked our show today, and if you care to let me know, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com. I look forward to seeing you the next time.